Sorry about that, a little delay. Well, I hope everybody had a nice, quiet Sunday afternoon. Um, Mine was very quiet. Took a nice long nap. Don't know if that's what I needed, but that's what I did. So hopefully you guys maybe have to take a nap too. This evening, I thought we'd look at the idea of bearing burdens. Our illustration here is kind of, lifting some heavy weight and maybe not quite able to get that up there. And so, in the world of athletics, we talk about having a spotter, and that spotter helps you, bear that burden, live up to your full potential. So, the same kind of idea when we come to being a Christian, except we're not lifting weights, we're dealing with life issues. But our proof text will come from Galatians chapter 1, 1 through 5, the first 5 verses will be our proof text. And this evening I'll be reading from the ESV. It says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he has something when he has nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be to himself alone and not to his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load." So we're going to take a look at these first 5 verses here tonight and look at this idea of burden bearing, if you will. All kinds of burdens in a Christian's life, right? There's self-imposed consequences of past wrongs, if you will, committing felony, crimes, etc. Maybe scandals, whatever it might be. Bad decision making, if you will, and living with the consequences with that. Acceptance of responsibility. Perhaps it's supervise. I remember when became a supervisor, I always thought that it was pretty glorious to be the boss man. But then once I stepped into those shoes, I was like, "Whoa, this is not what I expected it to be." And life got a lot more harder and a lot more difficult. Solving facility problems was one thing, but solving people problems was a whole other issue. So increased responsibility, whether it be supervisor duty, a business owner, or the work of an elder. When people step up to fill those offices, if you will. Now they got a whole new dynamic going on in their life. Those are burdens. Those can be burdensome, if you will. Or they could be externally imposed. Common circumstances in life. Children, especially as children get of age and develop their own mind. Maybe they don't want to go the way of the church, or maybe they think that you've been lying to them all these. That can become a real burden. Cancer, loved ones getting really ill, really sick. That can be a big burden. Or worse yet, maybe a loss of a loved one. Maybe the loss of the breadwinner in the home. You just never know. And any one of those circumstances can befall us, and that becomes a huge burden to bear. Burdens can also be forced upon us by our fellow fellow Christians or fellow man, if you will. Divorce. I don't know anybody who gets married that sets out to get divorced, but usually it's one of the two partners who forces it upon the other. It's usually not a mutual thing. Or wrongdoing by others. Again, I don't think any of us want to have wrong or have evil things brought upon us, but we can't always control what others are doing. False accusations, thievery, whatever it might be. You just never know. So these are all burdens of a Christian life that will come. And they got to be borne. You're thrust into those situations, whether they're self-imposed or externally opposed. And so we're going to talk about the different kinds of burdens in our text, the ones that to bear, we're charged to bear one another's burdens there in verse 2. We also see in verse 5 that we must bear our own. So we're going to look at that. So the takeaway should be that we must do both in order to be successful as Christians. So that's what we're going to look at here tonight. So let's begin by bearing the idea of bear one another's burdens, helping somebody else with maybe the burdens that they have come upon. We must bear, that's the charge given to us there. Paul told the Corinthians there in verse 2, he says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So it's not, and Paul doesn't pose that as, if you're willing to. He doesn't even say that if you're up to it. Kind of, sort of, I guess, if you will. But I think the illustration here that Paul's pointing out is if you're able to, or if you're capable, you need to help your fellow Christian in bearing their burdens. It's not an option. It's part of your duty. It's part of the Christian psyche. We might say because others need our moral support. Those brethren who burdens befall them, that they need that support, they might need help. It might be a weight load, too much, and we don't want them to be crushed by that load. I.e., again, the illustration that we have up there. But maybe they took on a little bit too much, metaphorically speaking. And so they're overtaken in fault, if you will. There in verse 1 it says, brother, if anyone is caught in a transgression, the idea that they're overtaken by sin, whether it be self-imposed or not self-imposed. You never know. It's situational dependent. And so we could sit here and come up with all kinds of hypotheticals, but I think that's beside the point. But the takeaway should be is that somebody's been overtaken by sin, and they're struggling in it, and that's why they need help. So that one is this idea very excellent is surprise, the idea that they've been like caught off guard. Maybe they didn't realize that they were doing wrong, and it's been pointed out to them. That type of thing, or they, the idea that they are crushed and discouraged, i.e., the burden, i.e., the illustration. They just can't. They're overpowered by it. And if that's the case, why wouldn't we want to jump in and help them bear that burden? Again, our society, and I think we when we watch TV and we watch the news and stuff, there was a time, especially like in the big cities with organized crime, that if you got involved, that they would come and Guido might be knocking on your door, like, you're not going to be testifying tomorrow if you know what's good for you, that type of thing. So that spawned a psyche that, I'm not getting involved. I don't want to, I don't want to bring any harm upon, that type of thing. But I don't think that's really how our world, especially here in Guernsey County or Noble County or Muscatine County, whichever county you live in, I don't think we live in that type of world. So I don't think we need to be careful not placate to those things. We should be looking to be involved, especially with our fellow brethren here within that we assemble with. We should want to be involved with their lives. We should want to be looking out for their well-being. Maybe they are being crushed, but the only way that we can find out if they are being crushed is if what? We get involved. And that takes getting to know one another. That takes spending time with one another. And that's the only way that those things happen. Because the last thing we want to do is to see one another become crushed and discouraged. Because to become crushed and discouraged is to what? To fall away from the household of faith. So bearing one another's burdens goes a long way in helping build or strengthen the household of faith, if you will. And then I guess it's not my last point, but that's the last point on the slide. It needs a help of strong or spiritual seasoned, in other words, it's the seasoned Christians, the one, perhaps the older, the gray-headed ones. Now, I'm not necessarily wise, so don't be looking to me. So, but I do have gray hair, but there are others that have more gray hair than I do. So, no, I'm just teasing. But needless to say, but the idea that, it's just like, in the workforce, in the Air Force, we had what we call the wingman concept. And the wingman concept worked many different ways. I talked about a little bit about kind of the battle buddy, getting make sure one of those had all their battle gear donned correctly because there's so many buttons and fasteners and stuff. There's no way that one person can reach all those. So it usually took two people to put on that stuff. Well, but that wasn't necessarily everyday life in the Air Force. But part of that wingman concept too was in what we call force development, and that was where the older, more wiser NCOs mentored the younger ones and helped them develop their leadership skills as they came up through the ranks. And so, and what you, if you was on the ball, if you will, as a young NCO, you would look for people that successful other leaders to have them mentor you so that when you were faced with a leadership question, maybe you shot them an email. Hey, this is what I'm dealing with. How have you dealt with this before? Hey, Airman Snuffy, I supervise airmen and they supervise, people like me. I reached Airman Snuffy was late, 5 times this week. What's the proper way of dealing with this type thing? So that, we had mentors that we could look up to ask questions and how to hopefully properly administer administrative policy and help and develop that force, if you will. And the same concept that I think is what Paul is bringing out here is that the seasoned brethren, the brethren who have been supervising, if you will, have more life experiences, help those who aren't necessarily as seasoned or have as much life experience of being a Christian, And so, maybe it's an elder, maybe it's a deacon, maybe it's just a guy who's been attending church for 40 years. But hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z here. Is this something that I should be struggling with? Is this something I should be concerned about? Hey, Brother Bob, can I speak to you over a cup of coffee tomorrow? That type of thing. Hopefully, Brother Bob doesn't go, I ain't got time. That type of thing. Brother Bob should, let me clear some things from my schedule and we'll have that cup of coffee. That type of thing. And unlike the rebel who needs sharper treatment, that type of thing. In other words, these are the seeker outs, the guys who are kind of looking for trouble, if you will, kind of getting in over their head on purpose, if you will. Titus 1:3 says, "This testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply." That they may be sound in the faith. In other words, there's a time for meek and gentleness, and then there's a time for a sharp rebuke. And that's all situational dependent, and just be, in other words, if somebody rebukes you, well, they weren't dealing with me with kindness and gentleness like Galatians 6, Galatians 6, I've never been so offended in my life. Well, no, maybe your situation required a sharp rebuke, and so be it. There's a time and place for everything. It is the point. And so usually the guys who are pushing the thresholds, the guys who are pushing the bounds, who aren't necessarily meek and lowly, but they're boisterous. Usually you have to deal with those a little bit harsher. But we must bear one another's burdens. The point, we just can't downplay it. We just can't get away from it, or we shouldn't try to. It's really for those that are weak in the faith and weak in the knowledge, whether it be new converts or new life experiences. Who knows? Maybe it's somebody who grew up in the church, but this is newlywed, never really had to deal with marital or relationship things, and maybe they're just going about the whole the wrong way. And so maybe instead of you're seeing them being tyrannical with their family life, and maybe you pull them off to the side and say, that's probably not the best way to be. It's a way to handle it, but it may not be the best way to handle it. I know that in the Air Force, we that seemed to be everybody's leadership style to begin with. When we all first stepped into that NCO role, we all wanted to rule with that iron fist. And so, somebody step out of line, hey, you get out of there, straighten up, get that toes on the line, that type of thing. And to a certain degree, that can be effective, if you will, but it can also bring down the morale of the organization very quickly. Nobody likes to be led by a tyrannical type environment. And so, the adage, you get more, you get more flies with, what is it, with honey versus vinegar type thing. So just, helping the weak, maybe manage those things a little bit better, if you will. And those are those various needs. Maybe it's just not one thing. I want to go back and look at Romans chapter 15 and verse 1. It says, "We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak." So instead of getting short, I've seen brethren, that would get short, but we got another one. Again, those that are weak in the faith, or new to Christianity, instead of rolling the eyes and huffing and puffing, a spirit of meekness and gentleness goes a long way. And when you don't, because when you think the least, when you least expect somebody to be watching your actions, they actually are. And you can lose a lot of influence if you don't handle things correctly, if you will. But various needs, those are various needs. Looking into Romans chapter 16 and verse 2, says that you may welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints, and help her in whatever she may need from you, for she has been a patron of many, and myself as well. But look, the focus there, help her in whatever she may need. There is no one size fits all. There is no one issue that becomes all Christians. We're all individuals, and so it's all different circumstances. It's all different life experiences for us all. So, that's why we look to the more seasoned brethren to help out with bearing of burdens. We don't usually don't match up a new convert with a new convert. Well, you guys see what you can come up with and figure it out on your own type thing. That's not what we really want to do. Next point is that because the tables could be turned, or the shoe may be on the other foot, per se. So, i.e. the seasoned brother, lest you be fall, right? Right? Lest you be fall yourself. Many a brave men, I'm sure that, Paul, when he shows these words, knew that there would be many that would overestimate or underestimate the brevity of the situation and get themselves in trouble, if you will. And so we or if we ourselves find ourselves in with a big burden, it's didn't happen to me. I've been a Christian for 50 years. Well, maybe it took 50 years to live that life experience. You just never know. And you never know how you're going to deal with a situation, too. I've seen this happen to people all the time, but they never knew how they was going to react. Much like, like going into war. You go through kind of what they call conditional training, if you will, before you deploy to a war zone. And a lot of that is desensitization, trying to get you used to the war environment. So it's a lot of hands-on with the weapons, a lot of different firing scenarios and stuff. Not that you're expecting to get into those situations, but it's just in case you do get into those situations. Uh, but the reality of the situation, despite however much training you may have leading up to that, once you get into those situations, you never know how one another's going to act. Some people just lose it. They just become comatose. They don't know how to respond to whatsoever. And then those that often that you think were the weakest that would be cowering are the ones who are charging and defending the line or that type of thing. You just never know. And so we got to be careful because, like I said, the tables could be turning on us. May later want one another to bear our burdens, type thing, and because we didn't handle things correctly for others, maybe others might be less likely to help us. But one that comes to mind, the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man wanted nothing to do with Lazarus, wouldn't even give him the crumbs off his table, would he? But once he found himself in torment, who is he calling upon? Who is he asking? Just let him dip that one finger in the water. All of a sudden, he wanted Lazarus' help, right? And so that should be, again, that's a little bit of a different takeaway, but it just shows that you just never know the situation that you're going to be in. And you might need the help of the very person that you shunned once before. And so we must show mercy in order to obtain mercy. We must show mercy in order to obtain mercy. Matthew chapter 5, verse 7 says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." So we need to, mercy begins with us. We're going to receive, I kind of believe, for the most part, we'll probably receive as much mercy as what mercy, as we're willing to give out ourselves. Same way when it comes to forgiveness. How many times do I have to forgive our brothers? Once, twice, three times, no, 7 times 70. The idea, an infinite amount of times. But how many of us struggle with forgiving somebody multiple times? And James chapter 2, verse 13 says, "For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." And so, I tend to believe that, a lot more, the more merciful that we are here in our own time, the more mercy that's going to be shown upon us on the day of judgment. And we must bear one another's burdens because the tape, this is just thing, but so that must not let pride deceive us into thinking otherwise. There in verse 3 of Galatians chapter 6, it says, "If anyone thinks he has something when he has nothing, he deceives himself." So we don't be deceived by your abilities, if you will. Always proceed with caution, I think is what he's trying to tell. And because one must fulfill the law of Christ. That's why we need to bear one another's burdens, because this is what Christ would have us to do. It's, again, in the opening, as I said, it's not an option. I think too many of us, when it came to the parable of the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite viewed it as an option to help that individual, and they opted not to. And we see who the man's neighbor was. It was the one who stopped and helped out. And so, so therefore, do we want to be in the same category as the priest and the Levite? I would say I don't want to be. Well, then we must stop and bear one another's burdens when the opportunity arrives. Verse 2 says, "Bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ." And John 13:34 says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, and you also are to love one another." And so, to love one another, it's not an option. I understand the world kind of treats it as it's optional if we love one another, but to the Christian, it's not an option. It's a way of life. It's the way of the Christian life, and that's what it means to put off the world. When we become a Christian, we're saying, I'm not going to be like that anymore. I'm not going to view that option to love. But too many of us yet today live by that Old Testament law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth type thing. And that's not the way that Christ would have us to live. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to help that individual. They did this to me. They did that to me. And so what? Look at what happened to Christ on the cross. Look at how he was tortured, and yet he had the presence of mind to what? Forgive them for what they do not know what they do. What presence of mind do you have with your fellow Christians or your fellow neighbors and helping them with their burdens? Are you picking up their crosses and helping them carry their burdens? Look at the number of people. That's what Christ, when it came to his disciples, he says, give it all up and bear your cross and come with me. And how many came with him? Hardly any at all, right? Just a few. Just how many burdens are you willing to bear? Hopefully you're willing to bear them all. But yet, for some reason, I tend to believe that we become short-sighted and we forget about Christ. And we think that Christ only hung upon the cross for me. And I don't have to do anything in response to that. All I got to do is be dipped in water and I'm good to go. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work that way. We really have to retrain our mind in all aspects of the gospel. Just not the easy aspects. Not the aspect, we all show up to church when we're supposed to, and we sing, and, that's the easy part, right? The hard part, this becomes the hard part. This is the part that nobody wants to talk about. But the reality of it is, we've got to do it. We've got to learn to do it. We've got to master these skills. So that fulfills one part of it, bearing one another's burdens. But then there's also a charge later on down there, and I believe verse 5. We got to bear our own burdens as well. Right? Yep, we got to bear our own burdens by showing godly independence, if you will. There is an ungodly independence. And, I need nothing from you, nor do I owe you anything type attitude. I'll go at my own. I don't need your help. And because I don't need your help, I'm not going to offer up my help to you. That type of thing. We don't need to be thinking like that. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 21 says, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. We have need for one another. We might be able to think, and again, this is part of the American psyche, is that John Wayneism, if you will, that bravado, especially when it comes to men. I can do this. I got this. I can weather this storm. But probably we've pointed out several times, probably the number one sin that men suffer is pornography. Is so prevalent in our society today. I think what was the last time I looked? About 60% of men who attend church, now, I'm not saying the Church East Cambridge Church of Christ, that's not what I'm saying. But as the statisticians of the men that they surveyed across the United States, men who said that they were Christians and attended church regularly, they found about 60%, at least 60% of them suffer from some type of pornography addiction, if you will. So that I tend to believe that that number is probably even higher in reality, because I do believe it's a large secret sin. And so Many of men will sit there. Oh, I don't have a problem. I'm not affected by that, and go home that very night and do that very thing. Many people need help in that aspect and will not seek it out because it's an embarrassing. They don't want anybody to know, that type of thing, and they think that they can just bear that burden on their own, and they slide deeper and they slide deeper and they slide deeper and they slide deeper. And that's pretty much the way it is all the time with just about every type of sin there is. You keep sliding deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and before you know it, you're just overwhelmed by it, and then you can't get out. Then you need somebody. So we don't need to be thinking about that. That's an ungodly mindset. Ungodly mindset. Or there's, I know my rights in Christ. I plan to exercise them regardless. That type of mindset. Consider 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 through 23. It says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. The Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might have some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing." So what's Paul saying there? I am free from all. You know, Paul could have stopped there. You know, exercising his rights, if you will, but that's not where he stopped, is it? Paul says, "Yeah, I'm free, and I'm free from all, but I make myself a what servant to all." How many of us have submitted to us as a servant to all? You know, you know. So really, being a Christian is not about exercising rights of freedom, being free from whatever, but it's actually what? It's about exercising the right to be a servant to all, to be a help to all, uh, and to receive help from all. These attitudes, whether it be my rights in Christ or I do nothing, I need nothing from you, those are all ungodly attitudes. and this type of attitude goes nowhere in helping us bear with our own burdens. All it does is it allows us to be buried in our own burdens, is what it ends up doing. It doesn't help you bear it. It helps you get overcome by it. But by showing godly independence, if you will, there is God, there is a godly independence. I must be a judge by my own actions rather than others. That type of mindset. Let me be critical of myself first, and don't rely upon others to point out my faults, perhaps. Uh, it makes little difference if actions are better, worse, or same as one another. In calling upon the NIV version there of Galatians 6:4, it says, "Each one should test their own actions." Isn't that interesting? Like each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. So how do we go about bearing our burdens on our own? Well, we should be testing our own actions. Is this something I really should be doing? Is this is this the right attitude of a Christian? Is this the right activity that I should be doing? What would others perceive me as doing if they see me doing it? This reminds me of, I don't want to take too much more time, but this reminds me of a story that Wiley Adams told me one time. That was Stan Adams' father that was here. Wiley, he said he used to have this guy mow his yard. Nobody wanted to mow his yard except for this one guy, and this guy worked at the corner store that sold alcoholic beverages, if you will. Was the only guy that could find to mow his yard. So the guy had just mowed his yard and Wiley wanted to pay the guy. So he stopped by where he was working to pay the individual, and somebody saw him come out of the store. Well, he said by the time he got home, he had 4 or 5 brothers were calling and asking why he was drinking, or if basically accusing him of being an alcoholic, and he said, for the longest, I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. And then it finally dawned on me that somebody must have saw me coming out of that store for paying that guy. Now, instead of that individual going to Wiley and say, hey, or pull it over, just pull over if you saw it. Hey, Wiley, how you doing? What brings you here? No, they didn't do that. But, I just, that's kind of way, just how things can spiral out of control, if you will. But let us test our own actions. I don't know. Maybe Wiley, maybe he should have tested his own actions. Well, maybe I should wait till the guy goes home. I don't know. But I think the idea there is that we can probably help ourselves by bearing our burdens if we're just a little bit more critical of ourselves before we step off the edge of the cliff, if you will. So let's hurry up and wrap this up. We need to bear our own burdens by accepting full responsibility for our relationship in God. No one else can save one another. We can only save ourselves. We can't save other people. No, we can try to help them. We can bring the gospel to them. We can try to help bear the burdens. But in the end, the only person who can save you is you. Period. God. That's just the reality of the situation. No one can do God's will for another as well. Uh, uh, whether it be first principles, godly living, and etc. No one can be the judge of another. So we shouldn't be judging one another. We shouldn't be condemning one another just because we see somebody doing something. That doesn't give us the right to condemn them. Instead, we should be helping them, right? Bear the burden, not convict them of the burden, type thing. And then no one can be God or conscience of one another. In other words, I can't be your conscience. I can't be your moral guide. Only you can be. Only you know the thoughts that are. Only you and God and Christ know what's going on in your brain. And so nobody else can be. So therefore, those are ways that we've got to bear our own responsibility. We have to have a godly conscience, if you will, not to be judgmental of others. We can do the will of God. We can't. Nobody can make us do the things that we're supposed to do as Christians. We can encourage. We can try to bolster, but we can't make you do it. I can't make you be here at 6:00 on Sunday if you don't want to be. Now, some people might try, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So that's how we can go a long way in helping bear our own burdens, if you will. So that's just a quick lesson, a reminder lesson on burden bearing, if you will. And Lord knows there's a lot of burdens out there to be borne or burdened with. We just, we got to get out there and get our hands dirty, if you will. So as we bring this to a conclusion, we want to, We want to help everyone to the extent that we can and bear any burdens that they have. And while we can help them, we can't do it for them. And that's where ultimately, remember, we can have assistance, but ultimately we have to bear that burden ourselves. We can get some help, and that will help should be willing to help burden it, but we still have to bear that burden ourselves. And then we must not want to add any unnecessary burden to another. In other words, sometimes we can, uh, you know, get it, we can become more of a burden ourselves to that individual than if we had never had, tried to help them out to begin with. Again, I think that goes a long way in measuring what our abilities are and not being overconfident in our abilities. Because last thing we want to do is pull them down further, as well as ourselves. But in the final analysis, we must bear our own burden before God, and that's the bottom line. So now we want to extend the invitation. The invitation is your opportunity, whether to become a Christian for the first time, or whether maybe you need some help with a burden that you're trying to bear. Again, I'm not a mind reader. We only know what you tell us. So if you're subject to that gospel call in any shape, form, or manner, let it be known as we stand and sing a song of the church.